Hello to you all, good afternoon, everyone that's watching us at YouTube and the audience also here in the American Corners MediaLab. Good afternoon to you all. So this is the 11th edition of the Tiny Lab Talks. Today we are going to talk about video games. Tiny Lab Talks are brief informal talks between researchers invited by the University of Aveiro and researchers of this university itself. With the sponsoring of the American Corner program on topics such as technologies, innovation, research and culture. The conversations will usually take place at the University of Aveiro's American Corner Lab, Media Lab, where we are today, here once again, with the support of course of the US Embassy here at Portugal. So let me tell you who we have invited to be here with us today. I want to give a warm welcome to Ernest Adams here on my left, and on my far left my colleague and friend Ana Isabel Veloso. Ernest Adams is a game designer and professor at the University of Uppsala, Sweden, with an extensive professional activity in the field of digital games. Having published Fundamentals of Game Design in 2014 and Game Mechanics, Advanced Game Design in 2012. Thank you, Ernest, for being here with us. And Isabel Veloso is currently the Dean of the Department of Communication and Art here at the University of Aveiro. Her research interests include video games, information and communication in technology-mediated contexts. During technology, she has also been the coordinator of several research projects such as Seduce 2.0, which is running just now, Eyes on Games and IMP Cubed. She has also been the coordinator of several research projects related to other pedagogical and issues. Myself, I'm Oscar Mialha. I'm Associate Professor at the Department of Communication and Art, so colleague of Ana Veloso that's here with us today. And my research is mainly related with human-centric interaction design and evaluation in info-communication contexts, where of course I've supervised many postgraduate work, done some research, publications, etc. So let's start with the topic for this tiny talk. I would say let's start with a teaser for our both invited professors here today. So why do we continue using the term video game if there's no video in digital games today no more? Ernest?
Well, most digital games still use a screen. They don't necessarily use a television signal in the traditional sense.
That's right.
But we build most of our games around the screen, and the term has come for historical reasons. I mean, when I first played my very first computer game, it was on a printing terminal. This was in 1970, and it printed on paper.
Yeah. And
the terminal, wrote characters, and that was what it could do. But, eventually graphical games took over. And so we started with a distinction between computer games and video games.
Yeah.
But video games are a much larger market. You make 10 times as much money from working on a console machine like the Sony PlayStation than you do making the same game for a PC. So for historical reasons, the term video game has kind of overshadowed everything else. Even if you're now making a game for a mobile phone,
that's a video game.
It's still a video game, even though there is no television.
We'll have to consider it's kind of a marketing brand, I suppose. If you say something else, people will not
They will
buy.
get confused. Yes,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
People know what it means, or they think they do.
Yeah. Anna, what do you think happened? Why not digital games or something else?
Yes, I think the video, it's no longer there, but the word is very strong, video games.
The brand.
And the brand over the years, starting to identify very well the object, and the games, the video games, identifies very well. So the digital games, which is now what usually is done, it's perhaps a new form of identifying the next generation of games, but I don't know if the trends enough to eliminate the word video games, but in fact they are digital, and they were electronic games, computer games, but the video game, it's the word that have established the space in this ecosystem, video game.
In my experience, digital games is actually an academic term.
Yeah, most from
Yes.
or interaction.
Yes, right. That has not moved out into the general public.
Yeah, it's not that social brand or economic or marketing brand. Yeah, I agree with you. Well, having Ernest here with us, this question is mainly for you, Ernest. And I still received the newsletter of this association. Back in '94, Ernest was the founder of the International Game Developers Association, EGDA, with very interesting discussions and concepts and contexts. Just to remember one, I signed the newsletter for a long time already of the EGDA Association, so International Game Developers Association, the Game Sutra, for example. Ernest, why did you why put up such an association back in 1994, right?
Yes. Well, I came from the electronics industry. So I came from the electronics business. I did not start in the game industry. And in the electronics industry, we had professional societies. We had the Association for Computing Machinery. We had the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, the IEEE. And I was used to an environment where there were professional societies to support the careers and the interests of people who were doing these things. So I came into the game industry, and there was no such organization. And everybody was happy to work independently, and they felt no need to communicate with their peers. But then we were attacked by the United States Congress in the United States, because Nintendo, not just Nintendo, there was a game that came out called Mortal Kombat. And Mortal Kombat was very violent.
Yes.
And so the United States Congress was very angry, and yes, about Mortal Kombat, and so they summoned the game industry to come and testify about violence in video games, and they threatened to censor video games. And at that time, there was nothing to prevent them from instituting censorship of video games, because they were considered toys for children. And I wanted to protect the rights of game creators, and I wanted to fight for our freedom from censorship. So initially, I started the IGDA as a political organization to fight for creative freedom. And I asked my colleagues to join, and we set it up. But I had a long-term goal that was more than just fighting the politics. I also wanted to create a professional society like the IEEE, like the Association for Computing Machinery, where we could get together, we could discuss things, we could, learn how to improve our careers, our working conditions. I also had to make sure people didn't think it was a union, because a union is not the same thing as a professional society. So that was what it was about in the early days. And now, in 2011, we got protection from censorship. So we actually are now treated like books and films, and the government cannot censor video games anymore. So now the IGDA is not worried about that anymore.
It was an achievement.
But yes, but we have other things to do, and now it's gone very international, and we have chapters around the world, and we're interested in best practices, and also in helping academic institutions to know what the industry needs. So we work with them as well. So, sorry, long answer, but
Ernest, thank you.
That's
Thank
what
you.
it's about.
Yes, and let's hope anyone that would like to understand what the International Game Developers Association is and why it was founded, that was the idea. Thank you, Ernest. Anna, you've been involved in several projects centered, in digital games for senior citizens or older adults. The term is also very academic around the world. Or elderly, or whatever, you can take it there, or impaired people. In the future, do you think the whole world, with all ages will be playing, even our older adults or very older adults? What's your idea on this? Why keeping on research with this area?
It's a good question. The society is aging. It's really a fact, and games are fantastic because they can join several thematics in one artifact. So that a huge goal that is to keep the aging population active and living active for more and more time. I think the games can help very much on that. There are several projects using games to help on dementia, and I think it's an important achievement for this area of this research area, joining two of these parts: the elderly population, the aging society, and the games that could help to keep them active. And I believe it's a future.
Okay, but you just gave us the perspective. Today we listened to Ernest highlight the experience, the user-centric approach when we're in a lean process, and the relevance of experience and the needs of the players. In this case, we are speaking of video games. And I noticed that in your comments, you are in the perspective of the player and his experience and his needs.
Yes.
But do you think industry is really aware of that, is interested in that?
Okay, that's a problem because the industry doesn't produce games for small minorities, just for the big target audiences. And the idea of having games for a specific target of the market can be so good for the big companies. Nevertheless, the age of the player are increased, and today it was 35.
That's what
and, with 35 years old,
the mean age of the
player can take the industry to think a little bit about developing games for other targets.
May I add?
Yes, of course, Agnes, of course.
You don't have to necessarily say, I want to make a game for old people. You simply have to make a game that does not lock old people out.
Yeah.
So if you make a game that is aware of their disabilities, their limitations, and you include, adjustments, so you can have bigger text if you can't see well, you can adjust the volume if you can't hear well. There's a lot of quite easy small changes you can make for people who have certain kinds of disabilities that make it accessible to them. So you don't have to make a game for old people. You simply have to make a game that allows old people to enjoy it. and then they will come.
Yes, and it's this point. It's very important. We during in our research project we used the Wii and some of the esports games, and joined a group of older adults to play it, and they love it. And the game is similar to it's the same game that is used by children. So playing bowling, it's for all of generation. It's an intergenerational issue.
So for everyone out there in YouTube, most probably getting your game universal, it would have to do with universal to the older adults. Would just take a more detailed look at your game interaction, namely your game controls, and most probably you'll have your audience with a larger scope and have a much more universal game.
Yes.
I suppose
For
that could do
example,
it.
if you compare the Wii and the Kinect, the interaction is easier with the Kinect because you don't need to
computer
have
vision
controls. Then with the command.
Thank you. Now, for both of you, I have here a question. So virtual reality is here for some time. Here in Shelf now, when we're saying here for general public,
right?
For universality. And last week Valve announced another Half-Life in virtual reality. What are the hopes and fears of this technology on your perspective? Virtual reality.
In my experience of gamers and the way that they play, virtual reality is great for certain applications. It's great for lots of industrial applications. We're using it for robotic surgery and other things like that. In the game field, it's great if you want to be in an environment that is completely surrounds you and you are by yourself in this environment, or you only interact with other people who are in the virtual space. And that's fine for that kind of experience. Valve's Half-Life game, I suspect, is going to be single player, or it's not going to have too many people at one time. But a lot of players like to sit in the same room by the side of their friends. Socializing. And, I worked on an American football game, and there was a lot of smack talk.
Of course.
And teasing and taunting and, all this kind of interaction. And virtual reality is not good for that because you are completely enclosed, and so it will be great for certain kinds of games, but it's not going to replace everybody sitting in the living room.
It won't be a universal paradigm.
No,
not at all.
Absolutely not. And of course, we also make a lot of games now on mobile phones, and they're played on the metro, on the subway, on the bus.
And it's a real competition with the virtual reality.
So, virtual reality is a niche. It might be a big niche, but it's still a niche.
With a specific context to be played. Maybe loss of socialization that you mentioned a while ago, because people can always say, yes, we have online. It's always a representation. That's not the real presential experience. And that we have to be aware of what we are doing. Anna, do you want to add something here?
A specific application, context, and a specific target, because I think that we can make a difference for other targets we don't prefer, do not want the virtual reality.
In a smaller scale, we might be speaking of problems very similar to what happened with 3D television inside the family's lounges.
I hope it won't be that bad.
And we know the drawback that had. I mean, having the family with 3D glasses looking at 3D television inside the lounge. Okay, we know what that meant in industry. Let's see what happens. But of course, this is just a similar issue here. Thank you for that, for your answer on that. There's an issue here that maybe relates again with the purpose of IGDA. The public opinion and panic about the video games, as Ernest highlighted just a while ago, seems to have come to an end. Okay, but recently the video game addiction became an official mental disorder in controversial decision by the World Health Organization. What are your opinions on this? Should we be worried about this? I mean, now it's the World Health Organization that's saying, "Oh, beware.
Yes,
We might
right.
be in the presence of an official mental disorder related with this
Right.
kind of activity." And what's your comments on this?
Well, I have never liked the use of the term addiction because addiction is kind of associated with injecting
Some chemical
You know,
stuff. That's
poisonous substance into your body, right? And I think there's a distinction to be made between addiction to a substance, which the medical community actually doesn't call it addiction. They call it habituation when you're used to a particular substance. And what we would call compulsive behavior. And compulsive behavior is what happens with gambling.
Yeah.
You're not putting a poison into your body, but you can become compulsive about doing it because your brain is creating chemicals that give you rewards when you win, and you seek to. So I do believe that there is a possibility of video game compulsion to be a social problem. I think it's an avoidable problem. I think that parents of children need to exercise control and limits.
Right.
When I was young, my parents told me you may only watch a limited amount of TV.
Yes.
They said
Yes.
no more
Yes,
TV.
that's right.
And
Excellent example.
Yeah, and
example.
you know, and that was the 1960s. So I feel that this is not on the same scale as addiction to poisonous substances, but it does require our attention, and it's not smart for game companies to ignore the issue, to pretend it doesn't exist. We have to be aware that it is a potential issue. You know, and just like, I don't know, there are some software now, this is not game software, that includes every now and then a little thing pops up that says take a break, you know,
To help you.
to prevent you from getting repetitive stress injuries. You know, get up and walk around. And you know, I think video game companies would be wise to be aware of this situation, because otherwise, yes, you know, the governments will be angry with us. So,
Anna, would you like to add on?
Yes,
to this?
addiction has several aspects that has to be considered in the medical community to see as a serious problem. And some of the addiction told about some use or abuse of video games are not really an addiction, but in certain cases there is. But there always a positive side of the games and the negative sides, and most of the time it's highlighted the negative side of the use of video games. But we have to look to video games in a positive and take care and find some strategies to resolve the negative aspect, like the use or abuse for too much time in the product, which is playing video game.
We have time for at least one question of our viewers. I have here a question, most probably for Ernest, but Anna, just add on anything if you. What are they asking here? It's nice because if you have any beginner game designers out there, most of our students, as Ernest mentioned today, are beginner game designers. And what the question is, what are the fundamentals of game design that are overlooked by these beginners? You know, the serious stuff they normally just. Yeah, I know you mentioned 2 or 3 today this morning. Could you just highlight 2 or 3 the things that they normally forget, and that can be extremely serious for a beginner game design?
Well, yes. One of the biggest mistakes is You have what you think is an absolutely wonderful idea for a game, and all your friends think it's a wonderful idea for a game, but you have no idea if the public thinks it's a wonderful idea for a game. And you become so committed to your own vision, and this is normal for creative people, and of course that's the way art works, right? But I come from the commercial industry. We're trying to make money, and you must be aware of what the player is going to enjoy. So in my book, Fundamentals of Game Design, I emphasize again and again and again, think about the player.
And test your ideas.
And test your ideas
your
on
concepts,
players. Absolutely,
your
yes.
concepts.
You know,
Player-centric design, it's
Right.
fundamental.
So it's not like it's not a religion, but almost. Start by testing your ideas with
And
in a
ask
player-centric.
why it's a good idea outside of your group, because
Yes.
it's a group
Yeah.
team and
once years ago, I had an idea that I thought would be really interesting about traffic management. And I was a programmer, and I was very interested in programming traffic lights and streets and systems. And I told this to a friend of mine, and she said, "Who wants to buy this game?" And I realized, oh, actually, only I want to do traffic management.
Okay, thank you, Ernest. One last question we have here for you both. So today, with the game engines like Unity and Unreal, which most of us use, even with our students, with much less effort than a few years ago, in fact, we can build nearly any game with a small and passionate team. What would you want to build, or are in fact building at the moment while we are here, in the near future, and for whom? So, what are your projects? What are your ideas at the moment? Anyone doing anything?
That's a tricky one.
Well, I have a head full of game ideas, but I'm, very busy. I have
Traffic management.
no, no. I've learned not traffic management, but I do. I want to make a huge role-playing strategy game with the people and the gods and the environment of ancient India. Because we see European Middle Ages, the medieval period in Europe, again and again and again, with knights and castles and so on, but we do not do India.
Yes.
And India has all this wonderful stuff, and you have to be careful, of course, because it's a living religion. You don't want to offend people, but I want elephants.
That's the challenge also for the designers.
Yes, right. So that's
interesting.
one. Yeah, and I want to make a game. I want to make a role-playing game. Again, I'm not sure who wants to buy this. That is about the experience of surviving the Blitz in London during the period when it was being bombed by the Germans. A cooperative game about surviving and living through the Blitz. Because I think that would be very informative, very educational,
and historical,
which
is important,
and potentially interesting. To find out
for the new
about
generations
what
to
it was
understand
like.
what it was like.
Yeah,
Very good. Thank you. Anna, and what's in your mind?
I would like to create a time machine.
The time machine?
But I don't know if that fits on creating a game. But, time machine which will be very interesting for traveling
And
between time.
Work with the time machine concept?
Yes.
Back to the future again?
Back to the future or back to the past.
Well, in our talk today at the conference, we've been talking that games don't necessarily have to be formal in the sense of challenge and achievement and winning and losing. They might just be experiences.
Narrative experience. Yes.
Or exploration experiences. So you may, be interested in a time machine game where you simply go and explore the ancient world without competition.
Okay. We have a good project here.
Okay, so thank you all for being here with us, the audience here inside the American Corners Media Lab at the University of Aveiro, the viewers, YouTube viewers out there, thank you for being online with us, and to everyone who looks at this afterwards, I hope you enjoy this video, and thank you of course for here this context and integration of our library and of the American Corner, the University of Aveiro, our Digital Media and Interaction Research Center, where I'm working and Anna is also working, and for facilitating all the resources and the possibility for us of being here too. The next Tiny Talk will take place next week, so stay tuned to our social media networks and don't forget to attend. Thank you for coming and viewing these Tiny Talks at the University of Aveiro, and see you around. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.